Hey there, this is Matthew Jennings, and on this episode of Peachjar Extra Credit, I am here with my friend Heather, and we are talking strategic communications and APR. Stay tuned. Heather, thank you so much for being here with me this morning. I can't thank you enough for taking time out of, I know, your extremely busy schedule. You are a highly sought after individual, and I know you're running around crazy right now at this conference. We are here at the California School Public Relations Association annual conference, the CalSPRA conference, in the state capital of Sacramento. We are in the conference hotel, so you might see people cruising behind us. There's a breakout room right here, might be going in and out of there. Just bear with us. We are talking about strategic communication today. You won't want to miss this one. Before we jump in, just tell me a little bit about yourself and your background. Who is Heather?
Well, you know, I have worked in school PR for 19 years, if you can believe it. I started when my oldest was an infant, and now he's in college. And so it's been a long run, but about 15 years ago, I started my business, Sounding Board Marketing and Communications, and I primarily work with school districts and county offices of education, giving them consulting and services on public relations, communication, and other types of support services related to that.
Yeah, you're doing a lot of great work. And we'll put a description, in the description, we'll put a link back to some of the things that Heather's doing and her information. So if you have more questions throughout this video, feel free to reach out. I know she's happy to take your call. So talk to me just a little bit. I see you wearing your APR pen. Talk to me a little bit about APR, and then let's jump into how that ties in and you can use that process for strategic communications. And I really want to take a little bit deeper dive on just what that means to be strategically communicative.
Oh, absolutely. I'm the proud APR chair for CalSPRA, which I've been for the last year, and so APR is really near and dear to my heart. And APR stands for Accreditation in Public Relations, and so this accreditation shows that an individual has the knowledge, skills, and abilities to carry out public relations functions and management, and especially they would be utilizing the RPIE four-step PR process. And so RPIE stands for research, planning, implementation, and evaluation.
Yes.
And so this process is really ingrained in the minds of people who have their APR, and we utilize it in any type of communication we do, whether it's something short-term, long-term, big or small, and it really ensures that we are approaching communication in a strategic way. We're also constantly evaluating what we're doing so that we're making continuous improvements in our communication.
That's awesome. Yeah. The APR process is something I've started. I haven't finished yet, but it's something I want to also get through, and it is really incredible. And that whole RPI process does flow into all things that you're doing, basically in the role of a communications director or somebody handling the communications for a school district or a business or organization or the city, anything. So let's talk about how it ties into strategic communications. Maybe we can kind of start at what is strategic communications?
Strategic communications is an intentional approach to planning communications. So it involves setting goals, objectives, and utilizing strategies, tactics, and activities to support those goals and objectives. So a goal, for instance, is really a larger intention of what you want to accomplish with that communication. And so in the past, we've always talked about SMART goals, but in reality, we actually talk about using SMART objectives, which are measurable and time-bound.
Okay, awesome. So just kind of speaking about the APR process, and since you are the CalSPRA chair, I know you've got a depth of knowledge on this, and you've helped many people through that process. Can you tell me a little bit, just kind of high level, what does it look like if I was interested in getting my APR?
Sure. So APR is really intended for people who have 5 or more years of experience in public relations. And it doesn't have to be all in school PR. It can be across different industries. And so the first part of the process is an application that needs to be submitted to the Universal Accreditation Board. And it's a pretty detailed application to help evaluate if a person is ready for the next step of the process. The next step of the process is the panel presentation, which is a portfolio that the candidate presents to a panel of other APRs who evaluates if that person is demonstrating that they have the knowledge, skills, and abilities related to the APR, as well as their understanding of the RPIE process. From there, they determine if that person is eligible to advance to take the APR examination, and that APR examination then evaluates the person's knowledge, skills, and abilities in about 6 different areas. And so that entire process, there's a timeline of about a year for the person to complete it from the time they submit their application to when they take their exam. And so people should really plan around different types of life types of activities that might be occurring, and determine when the best time is for them to start the process.
Okay, great. And I'll put a link in the description back to some resources and information if you're interested in learning more about that APR process. I know I don't have mine yet, but I strongly recommend it. Even just going through the learning process and reading the book back to back a couple of times has really made me a stronger communicator. So I can only imagine completing that process is even going to be better. So definitely link back out to that.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me a little bit about how then that APR process ties into strategic communications and what some of those goals might be?
Most definitely. So the planning part of the RPIE process is really where strategic communication comes into play. And that planning portion involves setting goals. So goals are longer term, and they are future statements of being, basically, that are related to the organization. And they're really uniquely tied to the organization's key public. So it's really important for people to really understand their audience, because how you communicate with one audience might be different than another. And so this is really where research really comes into play and understanding the goals. So that might be like taking a look at your LCAP and what kinds of results came out from that, or even other types of surveys that you may have put out there. So that's really the first step of the process.
That's awesome. Or even the analytics behind the tools that you're using or leveraging. If you're using billboards on the freeways, and data's a little bit harder to get on that. But if you're not getting any results at all, if you have your kinder registration out there, and during the time that billboard was out there and you didn't get any kinder registrations, that billboard might not be effective. But learning where your audience is and how to communicate, that's a really big tip.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then the next step is setting objectives. And so objectives, actually, with public relations planning, we actually set SMART objectives. So these are what are specific and time bound. This is where you have numbers attached to them, where you want to maybe raise awareness by 40%, for instance, or educate X% more people on a certain type of program that's happening. And so one of the things about objectives is there's actually a few different types of objectives. So there's output objectives. So this is saying, okay, we did this and now we're done. These are not necessarily the strongest objectives, but they still have a little bit of value because you do have certain things you need to check off the list, right? There's also process objectives, and these are the ones where it talks about educating or informing others. And then the last one is called outcome objectives, and this is where you're trying to change behavior and attitudes. And so this is actually one of the most valuable types of objectives that I would definitely recommend people build into their plans. So the next part of the process is actually the strategy. So we have goals, objectives, strategy, and then tactics. So we call that the GHOST method. And so strategies is basically your roadmap. So this is where you start really outlining what you're going to do. And so the strategies are going to outline developing a toolkit for educators, for instance. So these have some really specific types of actions behind them. And then the tactics actually define how you're going to accomplish those different types of actions. So it might be developing a flyer, developing a series of social media posts, for instance. And then you'll have some different activities that support those tactics. So this is going to be your budget, your timelines, who owns the different tactics. And so the reason why we do all of this is because we don't want to do this let's see what sticks approach. We actually want to take a really detailed look strategic look on how we're trying to accomplish these different types of goals. And so one of the things I always advise people to look at is, people might say, hey, we need to have a flyer for this, right? We have a construction project going on at a school site. We need to send a flyer out. And so I asked the question, well, okay, how are you ensuring that everybody knows what the impact of what that construction project's impact will be? So who's the flyer going out to? Oh, well, we're going to send it to our parents. Okay, well, what if the construction project has an impact on traffic in the community? Or what if the staging area is right behind somebody's backyard? Are you considering your key publics who might be in the community? And so when you take a strategic approach, you actually start off with the goal in mind of, we want to inform people about this construction project and its impacts. And then you start looking at your key publics. How are we going to inform our teachers and staff? Because maybe they have to move classrooms, right?
Yeah.
Maybe staff has to pack up some boxes and people need to know about their paid time to get their new classrooms ready and their new office areas ready, right? And then the parents, right? They need to know, oh, is my child's classroom going to be moved? Or is my child going to be moved to a different school while this construction process is going on? And when you look at the community, you can let them know about the impacts to them. And so that's where being strategic really allows you to ensure that you're hitting upon all those different publics and how you're actually going to do it. Because the community, maybe a flyer won't work for them. Maybe having a town hall meeting might work better to answer all their different questions. And so there's a lot of different ways to look at this and determining what types of approaches will work best with each audience.
That's awesome. So, if I could take a step back to the strategies, the tactics, the activities that back up the tactics, do you find that there can be confusion behind those definitions of what the difference between a strategy and a tactic is?
That's actually a great question, right? And so strategies provide the roadmap to your objectives, okay? The tactics are the stops along the way to make sure how you get those different strategies done. So strategies aren't as broad as objectives are, but they're going to be broader than tactics are going to be. To use the school construction example, perhaps the strategy is informing all of our audiences about what is happening with the school construction project and how it will impact them. A tactic would be social media posts, providing information about opportunities to get people's questions answered. Another tactic might be develop a website with frequently asked questions. Another tactic might be develop a postcard that goes out to community members. And then there might be a couple more tactics, emails to staff about what's happening with the construction projects and how that will impact them, flyer home, email home to families about how the construction projects will impact them. So the tactics really go into specific of what you're going to do to achieve that strategic aspect of your entire communication plan.
I love that. Thanks for breaking that down a little bit, because I know that when I started studying, initially I had some trouble myself deciphering, okay, is that a strategy? Is that a tactic? Okay, where am I at here on this? So that really helps.
Most
That's
definitely.
Awesome.
And when you ask about activity, so let's say we take one of those tactics, postcard, right? Postcard, what kind of resources are needed? Well, we have to budget for X number of postcards and printing of them and mailing of them, right? And then also identifying the timeline for that. We put the timeline, the postcard will go out in March of 2024. Who's responsible? Well, maybe it's a combination of the communication office and the print shop. So really get into the specific of the activity and who is doing what, when, and how much it's going to cost. Staff time is another resource. You want to include that as well, because if you start lining up different things that require staff time and you realize you're asking a lot of staff in 1 month to do a lot of things, then as you're developing your activities, you might say, okay, maybe we might shift this timeline a little bit in order to ensure that we're not asking too many things that compete in a person's priority list.
Being strategic.
Yep, exactly.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Heather, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know that there's already people waiting for you, so I'm going to let you get out of here. But before I do, are there any kind of key takeaways you can share with the group, strategic communication, APR-wise, anything that really stands out, needs to be forefront of mind for a communicator out there navigating these processes we've been talking about?
One thing about APR that I absolutely love is that it really focuses on best practices of public relations. And so, when somebody who has an APR comes to the table and says, hey, we need to use this process, the RPIE process, because it's a best practice in communication, that really helps give more legitimacy to our profession. There are lots of folks out there who are doing PR type work who aren't using this type of approach, and sometimes that means that they may be doing things in a non-strategic way, they might be doing things unethically or even illegally. And so the APR really leverages all the things about the profession that are the best practices, that are really focused on ethics, that I think are so important for folks to bring to the table. So that's really a huge reason why I also encourage people to get their APR. When it comes to strategic communication, so many communicators are at the table in their cabinet meetings and they hear about different things that are happening. And so it's really important to listen for opportunities to be strategic with communication, asking the right questions of, hey, how are we going to communicate that to our community? And finding out what people were intending to do and really being forthright about asking for there to be a strategic process.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just really easy to sit down and say, hey, let's knock out some goals, objectives, strategies, and tactics. You can do it in one meeting, you can do it in a few meetings. And in the end, it will help to save a lot of time in the long run on answering people's questions, on having transparency, on ensuring that people have the trust of your organization throughout any type of process that you're doing. And so it really goes a long way in building relationships ultimately with your community. And so a little bit of time up front really pays off in the future.
That's well said. Yeah, all of that's amazing, and it makes everything more effective. And when especially in the role that communications plays in school districts, we have a huge hand in the culture and the brand and people feeling like they're part of something. And if you aren't doing that the right way, you can erode that trust really easily, and it's really hard to get it back. So being effective and going through that whole, RPI process and even the APR component. And if you don't have your APR, it doesn't mean you can't strategically communicate. Lean into some of these things that Heather has just shared. And just try to be more strategic in the way that you're approaching communications. And I also found, like, over the years, somebody would come and say, well, I need this on the website, but why,
Yes.
And then having the tools and the resources in your own mind and the confidence to lean into the skills that you've learned allows you to push back in areas that you need to make sure that you're not telling somebody no, that's not going on the website, but understanding why they need that. Like you had mentioned, where's your audience then? Doing that research beforehand and getting it out in the way that is going to be the most impactful. I can't thank you enough for joining me this morning. This has been awesome.
Well, thank you. This has been a pleasure and my honor too.
This is rad. So if you have any questions, I know Heather will take your calls. I certainly will take your calls. Hopefully you like this. Be sure to like, share, comment, and follow for more. Get in there in the comments. We'll participate. I'll link back to Heather's information as well so you can reach out to her directly with anything that you need. Really appreciate you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. All right, that's it. We'll see you later.
Bye.